Saturday, June 25th, 1983 began like any other day, but everything was about to change for 37-year-old John Gentry. His girlfriend had told him she was expecting a child and that he would soon become a father. Together with a small group of friends, they spent some time at a restaurant celebrating several happy occasions at once. The evening went perfectly. Around 10 to 10:30 p.m., John decided it was time to call it a night. He planned to head home, pick up a bottle of champagne on the way, and wait for his girlfriend there so they could continue celebrating the wonderful news. John walked to his Ford Futura parked near the restaurant. He got inside, put the key into the ignition, and turned it. The engine obediently purred to life. Then he switched on the rear lights. All the same familiar actions, except this time, hell itself broke loose. Because by doing so, he triggered the detonation of dynamite that had been waiting in the trunk of his car. The explosion sent shards of metal flying forward, tearing into the man's neck and back, hurling him out of the vehicle. Lying on the pavement, bleeding, surrounded by smoke and shattered glass, he thought the battery had exploded. At least to his disoriented mind, that seemed the only possible explanation. The next thing he remembered was medics cutting off his clothes and rushing to treat him. Then he was lifted into an ambulance and taken to the hospital. For 4 days, John would hover between life and death, but he would pull through and go on to play a key role in this story. A story that, in fact, is not really about him at all. It is about a woman who, from her earliest childhood, had known the vilest side of this world and decided to take from it everything she believed was hers, even at the cost of her own flesh and blood. Rescue services rushed to the scene near the Driftwood restaurant in Pensacola, Florida. Paramedics immediately began treating the victim, while officers focused on finding out what had caused the explosion. They questioned witnesses who had been present at the scene. The witnesses explained that the victim's name was John Gentry, 37 years old. He had been at the restaurant with his girlfriend, Judi Buenoano. Judy owned a nail salon. One of her employees had just turned 21, and Judy wanted everyone to celebrate the occasion. It had been a wonderful dinner. People laughed, enjoyed themselves, and made plans to go to a club afterward. John, however, didn't want to go to the club. Instead, he decided to head home and wait for his girlfriend there. But just as he walked outside, a deafening explosion rang out. The entire restaurant shook. Everyone rushed out into the street. John was lying on the pavement, surrounded by shards of glass, smoke, and debris. The roof of his car had been blown off, the seats ripped to shreds. It was nothing short of a miracle that John had survived such a blast. Still, he was gravely injured, his body riddled with fragments of metal. Judy dropped to her knees beside him. She screamed and wept, begging him to hold on and not lose consciousness. When the paramedics arrived, she accompanied her lover to the hospital. After examining the car, to everyone's horror, it became clear that the explosion had not been an accident. Dynamite had been placed inside the vehicle, wired to the rear lights. 2 sticks of dynamite were found in the trunk behind the back seat. The moment John switched on the lights, the car blew apart. Unfortunately, John's vehicle had been parked quite a distance from the restaurant entrance, and the police were unable to find any eyewitnesses. Detectives hurried to the hospital, where doctors reported that the man had miraculously survived surgery, but remained in critical condition. He was in a coma. Investigators then spoke with his loved ones, who had rushed to the hospital, fearing this might be their last chance to say goodbye to someone dear. They described John as a very pleasant, polite, and well-educated man. Being attractive and sociable, he was well-liked by women. He had met his girlfriend 3 years earlier. The romance developed quickly, and John was completely smitten with Judy. Within 6 months, they began living together. John, Judy, and her teenage children, James and Kimberly. Over the years, their relationship had only grown stronger, and their businesses more successful. Judy owned a beauty salon, while John sold carpets and wallpaper. Their ventures brought in a very good income, and John and Judy enjoyed spending their money, lacking for nothing. But as with many businessmen, John occasionally had disagreements with his partners. Judy explained that at one point John decided to expand and struck a deal with a woman in Mobile, Alabama, to open another store. However, the deal fell through, and the would-be partner became furious. She filed a lawsuit against John and lost just 3 weeks before the incident at the restaurant. Could it have been possible that she had hired someone to kill John out of revenge? Detectives were uncertain. A professional hitman would have made sure the victim was killed, placing dynamite under the seat rather than in the trunk. Whoever planted the explosives was clearly not a professional. Even so, detectives spoke with the suspect named by Judy, but they found no connection to the crime. 4 days after the explosion, investigators finally received the news they had been waiting for. John had come out of his coma. He was wrapped in bandages, looking and feeling terrible, but he was alive and able to answer police questions. John had no idea who might have wanted him dead. He was certain it wasn't the woman from Alabama because their disagreement wasn't worth killing over. Hoping for some kind of lead, detectives asked if he remembered any unusual problems in recent months. The man replied that about 6 months earlier, a mysterious illness had forced him to spend nearly a week in the hospital. Though doctors were never able to determine what was wrong, he had suffered from severe stomach pain and nausea. Eventually, he felt better and was discharged. His girlfriend had once worked as a nurse, and she took excellent care of him. He returned home, resumed his normal life, continued taking vitamins, and soon after, he ended up back in the hospital with the same unexplained stomach pains. John blamed the vitamins, thinking he might have developed an intolerance. The police asked how he had started taking them in the first place. He explained that he had caught a cold, and his girlfriend had given him capsules to help him recover faster. Detectives requested his permission to take the capsules from his briefcase and have them tested. While waiting for the results, they decided to put the man's life under a microscope, and they would start with the person who had given him the medicine, Judi Buenoano. Everyone who knew Judy was captivated by her. Intelligent, charming, generous, sociable, no one had a bad word to say about her. And when investigators ran her name, nothing suspicious appeared. But in the records department, a clerk happened to mention that the Spanish surname Buenoano was the equivalent of the English surname Goodyear. The detective asked her to check under that name as well, and his instincts proved correct. There was information on a Judy Goodyear. That was unusual enough for detectives to wonder why Judy had changed her name to Buenoano. So they dug deeper and uncovered a series of disturbing coincidences, both fascinating and horrifying. Judy Anna Lou Welty, known to everyone simply as Judy, was the third of 4 children in the family. Her mother was Apache, and the girl was named in her honor. But before Judy even turned 2, her mother died of tuberculosis. Her father, a farm worker, was supposed to raise the 4 children on his own. Supposed to, but he didn't. Instead of surrounding them with love and care after their mother's death, he cowardly abandoned his responsibilities. He sent Judy and her younger brother Robert to live with their grandmother, while the 2 older children were given up for adoption. It was a very difficult start in life for little Judy and Robert. A glimmer of hope appeared about 10 years later, when their father remarried. He brought Judy and Robert back from their grandmother's home. Their stepmother already had 2 sons, and in theory, Judy and Robert could have become part of a big, happy family. In reality, Judy was turned into a servant in her own house. She had to take care of all the household chores, and if her father or stepmother didn't like something, which happened very often, she was forced to sit hungry in the corner while the rest of the family enjoyed dinner. Robert suffered as well, beaten by everyone, his father, stepmother, and even his stepbrothers. Judy endured this hell for 2 years, until at the age of 14, she snapped. In an attempt to protect Robert, she poured boiling grease on her stepbrothers. Then she began throwing anything she could find at her father and stepmother. Instead of helping the girl, instead of involving social services, they sent Judy to jail for 2 months. At just 14, she found herself behind bars among real criminals. When her sentence was over, she refused to return home. Instead, she was placed in a juvenile facility that also had a school. She graduated at 16, but wanted nothing more to do with her family, not even with Robert, whom she blamed for her breakdown. Judy felt that the world owed her for all the years of humiliation and suffering. From that point on, she decided she would manipulate the system at every possible opportunity. Judy trained as a nurse and began working in the profession. Still a teenager herself, she gave birth to a boy she named Michael. She was not married to the child's father, something frowned upon at the time. A few years later, she met a young Air Force Sergeant, James Goodyear. The two fell in love, got married, and James adopted Michael as his own. In their marriage, 2 more children were born, James Jr. and Kimberly. In 1970, James was deployed to Vietnam, where the war was raging. He returned home a year later. But though James had survived the war, he did not live long after returning to his beloved wife. He began suffering from seizures, stomach pain, nausea, and hallucinations. He was admitted to the hospital, where he died on September 15, 1971. Doctors told his wife that his death was the result of lung, heart, and kidney failure. A 37-year-old man suddenly dying from the simultaneous failure of 3 major organs should have raised questions. But no one looked deeper. The grieving widow didn't even wait for her husband's body to grow cold before hurrying to the bank to collect the payouts from the 3 life insurance policies taken out on James. While her husband was away at war, Judy didn't even try to remain faithful. She was seeing a man named Robert Crawford. Their affair ended when her husband returned home, but it resumed shortly after his premature death. It was Robert who introduced Judy to Bobby Joe Morris, and very quickly, his lover moved in with Bobby Joe, while Robert disappeared from her life. At the time, he didn't know it, but he was incredibly lucky their paths parted. Judy soon changed both her own last name and that of her children to Morris, even though she and Bobby Joe were never legally married. When Judy and Bobby Joe moved to Trinidad, Colorado, where they bought a house together, her previous home in Orlando mysteriously burned down. The property had been insured, and Judy collected a handsome payout. Judy and Bobby Joe lived in Colorado for only 16 months before his health began to deteriorate. Judy claimed that the 39-year-old man enjoyed drinking, so doctors treated him for pancreatitis. He did improve somewhat in the hospital and was discharged into the care of his nurse girlfriend. At home, however, he grew ill again. He collapsed at the dinner table, unconscious. Bobby Joe was rushed back to the hospital where he died 5 days later. Doctors suspected nothing and ruled that he had died of natural causes. Judy wanted her boyfriend cremated quickly, but his mother intervened and insisted on a proper funeral. Sadly, she did not insist on an autopsy or a thorough toxicology test. Had she done so, the coroner would have discovered enough arsenic in the man's system to kill 10 people. Judy did not attend her lover's funeral. She was far too busy collecting the payouts from the 3 life insurance policies she had taken out on Bobby Joe, as well as another insurance payout for their Colorado home, which quite conveniently had also burned down. After Bobby Joe's death, his surname no longer meant anything to her, and she changed it to Buenoano. In June 1978, she moved to Pensacola and bought a new house for herself and her children. One couldn't help but wonder, in her plans, how long was this new home supposed to last before it too would accidentally go up in flames? The police continued digging into her past and made an even more shocking discovery, this time about her son Michael. Judy had long stopped mentioning him, but she had another child, Michael, who had been adopted by James Goodyear. In 1979, 8 years after his stepfather James had died, Michael also joined the Army. The teenager joined only because he wanted his mother to be proud of him. He had always felt like a burden to her and longed only for simple maternal love, nothing more. However, his mother hated her firstborn, most likely because he was born out of wedlock. Of course, it wasn't his fault, and if Judy had anyone to blame, it certainly wasn't Michael. Michael completed his Army training and was set to begin service as a water purification specialist. But before that, he went home for 2 weeks to celebrate Thanksgiving with his family. At home, he suddenly fell ill. Although, was it really that sudden? He had trouble walking, his arm and leg muscles ached, he was nauseous, experienced abdominal pain, and white lines appeared on his nails. When he returned to the Army still suffering from these symptoms, doctors quickly narrowed down the possible cause to one thing: arsenic poisoning. But by a curious coincidence, officers used arsenic during water purification training. So everyone assumed the poisoning had occurred in the Army. The young man did not die, but he developed paresis, a condition characterized by partial loss of muscle strength. Unlike paralysis, where a muscle completely loses its ability to move, in paresis the muscle retains some, though reduced, function. Essentially, he could now fully move only his left hand. To help the rest of his body regain at least partial function, he wore a muscle support corset and bandages weighing 23 kilograms. But it was necessary if he ever hoped to recover. Naturally, Michael had to leave the Army. He returned home to his mother, who thought it would be a good idea to go canoeing with a son who could not move on his own and was wearing extremely heavy bandages. She placed Michael in the canoe, his brother James sat beside him, and they set out to fish. After a while, rescuers pulled Judy and James from the water. Judy claimed that while she was paddling, the boat hit a rock and capsized. The canoe struck James in the neck, and the mother rushed to help him. She helped her son stay afloat, but she could not help Michael. The weight of the young man immediately dragged him under. Imagine the horror of being pulled down despite desperate but futile attempts to stay afloat. Imagine the pain as water stung his eyes, clogged his ears, and finally filled his lungs, entering through his nose and mouth. The last thing he experienced before everything went dark was the bitter taste of betrayal from the person closest to him, the mother he loved more than anyone in the world, watched coldly as he drowned. Again, no one suspected anything. Despite Judy telling the officer who questioned her that their fishing gear had snagged on something and that the canoe overturned when one of them tried to free it, no one doubted her. It's astounding how calmly liars can tell two completely different stories in a short period of time and then act surprised when they become suspects. But it would be a long time before Judy was suspected of murdering her son. In the meantime, she hurried to collect the insurance payouts. Her son, of course, had been insured. The mother received $20,000 from the Army and 2 insurance policies worth $20,000 and $30,000. Additionally, she was to receive another $20,000 if Michael's death was deemed accidental. By a curious coincidence, Michael died as the result of an accident. The insurance companies paid her without question. Today, that payout would roughly equal $750,000. With this money, the loving mother opened a beauty salon. Business went well and was profitable, but Judy could not stop. She had already set her sights on a new victim, a successful businessman named John Gentry. Police in Pensacola reached these conclusions after examining Judy's life. Their suspicions were confirmed by a toxicology report. In the vitamins John had been taking, only the capsule's shells remained. Inside, investigators found arsenic and paraformaldehyde, a carcinogen capable of causing severe harm to the human body. This substance is also a disinfectant commonly used in beauty salons. The most striking part, however, is that this chemical wouldn't have been detected in a hospital or even a coroner's office because it is not listed among standard poisons. Detectives discovered that John had also been insured. He and Judy had taken out insurance policies on each other for $50,000, since they were both business owners, and if anything happened to one of them, the other could cover the first debts. But later they supposedly canceled the policies, or so John thought. In reality, Judy continued paying for his insurance, and John was insured not for $50,000, but for $500,000. Additionally, Judy was named in his will and would inherit half of his estate, totaling $750,000. Judy clearly believed she would get away with it, as always. Even before receiving the money, she had already booked a cruise for herself and her children, but of course, not for John. And the cruelest twist of all for the naive, trusting man was that Judy did not intend to have a child with him. Several years earlier, she had undergone surgery that made it impossible for her to ever become a mother. When detectives asked John if he remembered any other details about the day of the explosion, he recalled something he had never considered important, until now. He had bought car speakers and asked James, Judy's son, to install them in his car. James had promised to do it, but later John noticed the speakers hadn't been installed and assumed the boy simply hadn't had the time. Now, however, both he and the detectives saw it differently. Previously, detectives weren't certain that Judy had planted the dynamite herself, but now they were convinced it was her 18-year-old son. That evening, Judy had asked her boyfriend to park the car away from the restaurant entrance. John had found this odd, but complied. In reality, this allowed Judy's son to place the explosive device in John's car without fear of being seen. James took the dynamite, the car keys, installed the device, closed the trunk, and quickly disappeared. During a search of James's room, police found a wire identical to the one used to connect the dynamite to the car. An FBI lab report soon confirmed a complete and indisputable match. The dynamite itself was traced back to a close friend of James in Alabama. It wouldn't have taken James long to learn from him how to connect the wires. Given everything the investigators had already uncovered, they arrested Judy and her 18-year-old son James and charged both with attempted murder of John Gentry. Fortunately, John survived. However, detectives believed that other victims of the Black Widow had been far less lucky. Now they needed to find evidence linking Judy to the deaths of other men in her life. This required exhumation, a complex and difficult process. Permission for exhumation is granted only in extreme cases, when no other means of obtaining evidence is possible. Fortunately for the investigators, the court agreed and issued an exhumation order. On March 14, 1984, 13 years after his death, the remains of James Goodyear, Judy's late husband, were exhumed. When the toxicology results arrived from the laboratory, the investigators held their breath. James's body contained enough arsenic to poison 13 people. They also exhumed the body of Michael, Judy's son, who had drowned during a fishing trip. Arsenic was also detected in his body. Judy was tried for her crimes in separate trials. First, she was found guilty of the first-degree murder of her son Michael and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. 7 months later, she was convicted of the attempted murder of John Gentry and received an additional 12 years in prison. James, however, was acquitted by the jury, likely out of sympathy, since he had been willing to do whatever his mother instructed. The final trial concerned the murder of James Goodyear. The stakes were incredibly high. If found guilty, the 41-year-old Judy faced the death penalty. She took the witness stand and tried to defend herself, but the jury did not believe her.
You gave the jury a real good show. You don't know you weren't there.
She was convicted and sentenced to death by electric chair. On March 30th, 1998, the sentence was carried out. Judy was 54 years old at the time, and she spent her final hours with her children. Investigators also exhumed the body of Judy's boyfriend, Bobby Joe Morris. Toxicology revealed enough arsenic in his body to kill 10 people. However, since Judy had already been sentenced to death, prosecutors did not pursue another trial, sparing taxpayers the cost. James Goodyear, Bobby Joe Morris, John Gentry, Judy could have been happy with any of these men, as they genuinely loved her and were willing to care for her and her children. But it was never enough for her. She decided she wanted John's money. Without John, had she stopped after the first, second, or even third murder, she might have gotten away with it. Fortunately, her spree came to an end. But how many others like her have escaped justice?